Hello viewer, a warm welcome to Elimu TV where you watch and learn. Welcome to the 7th lesson of Biology Form 1. I am your teacher, Madam Christine Okot. So let us have a preview of what we're going to learn today in this lesson. First, we're going to review the other assignment I gave you. Then we're going to look at binomial nomenclature. We're going to look at the origin or a brief history of binomial nomenclature. We're going to look at the general rules of binomial nomenclature. We're also going to look at some of the examples of scientific names of organisms. And lastly, I'm going to give you an assignment. So starting with the previous assignment. So question number 1 was, what is biodiversity? And the answer was, it is a measurement of the variety of organisms which are present in different ecosystems. This just breaks it down to the variety of organisms that you can find in any habitat or any ecosystem, like the aquatic, the terrestrial. Then question number 2, what is the name given to the process of grouping organisms? And we discussed this in our previous lesson, so this is called classification. And the third question, part A, name the branch of biology that deals with the naming and classification of living things. And the correct answer is taxonomy. Then part B, what is the name given to scientists who work in this field? They are called taxonomists because they study about taxonomy. So previously we had talked about the 5 kingdoms. So I'm going to have a brief video so that it can just have a review of what we discussed in the previous lesson. So take a keen look at the video and you can identify some of the characteristics of the 5 kingdoms we have.
If something has one cell, like the bacteria of a cold, if it's unicellular in the monarch kingdom, it must go. If it's more complex, like an amoeba in a pond, unicellular or multicellular in the protist kingdom, it belongs. When we classify living things, we sort them into groups. Each group's called a kingdom, and there are 5 for us to choose. If it can't make its food, like a mushroom or some yeast, if it's a decomposer in the fungus kingdom, it must be. If it photosynthesizes, like a plant with leaves and roots, if it's a producer, the plant kingdom, we must choose. When we classify living things, we sort them into groups. Each group's called a kingdom, and there are 5 for us to choose.
So I hope you have enjoyed that video, and apart from enjoying, you have learned the characteristics of the 5 kingdoms we have, which is the Monera, that comprises of the bacteria. We have the Protista, which is composed of the algae. Then we have the fungi kingdom, which is composed of the mushroom, the yeast, and the molds. Then we have the kingdom Plantae, whereby the plants are in it. Then lastly, we have kingdom Animalia, where me and you will find ourselves in. So let us proceed to the business of the day. And today we're going to discuss about binomial nomenclature. So first, let us start by defining this word. So by defining this word, I'm going to break it down into 3 segments. So the first one is bi, then nomial, then nomenclature. So bi is a prefix name which means two. Bi means two. Then nomial is a Latin word which means name. And finally, nomenclature means a naming system or a system of naming things. So by definition, I can define binomial nomenclature as a system of naming where organism is given 2 names. Just use the way we have subdivided it into 3 groups so that you can define it. So you can either say it is a system whereby an organism is given 2 names. Just remember first, there has to be 2 names. Then it's also a naming system. So still, I can define binomial nomenclature as a naming system in biology in which each organism is assigned a unique name. It consists of 2 parts. The first part being a genus and the other part being a species. So like for example, I have a banana, that's the English name that we know. Then the scientific name is called Musa acuminata. So Musa is the genus name, then the species is the acuminata. So we've talked about a binomial nomenclature as a naming system that comprises of 2 parts. The first part being a genus and the second part being a species. So let us know what is a genus so that we can be able to know when we are classifying using the genus name, what exactly do we mean. So a genus is a group of organisms that have common characteristics or one common character. For example, Homo is a genus. If you take an organism that has the genus Homo, it means these are the primates. Like in human beings, we find ourselves in that. Then we have another example of a genus, Panthera. Panthera is a genus of large wild cats in the mammalian family. For example, we have the jaguar and the lions. All of these fall under the genus we call Panthera. So we have defined a genus, then species. Species is the largest group of organisms where 2 individuals are capable of reproducing fertile offspring. For example, the reptiles, the birds, the fish, and etc. So by defining species, there are 2 key points. They have to be, they can be able to fertilize offspring, and they belong to the largest group of organisms. So they can freely interbreed to give fertile offspring. So fertile offspring means like if the offspring can also be able to produce another fertile offspring, so that it becomes a generation, a continual effort of reproducing the other offsprings. So still we are defining binomial nomenclature. So as we have said, these are 2 words naming. So the root of this is from the Latin language. So binomial nomenclature, so it has to be the genus first. So this is a group of similar organisms that have different characteristics or one common characteristic. Then the second name being a species. This is the smallest and the most precise classification category. So for example, we have the Panthera leo, which is a lion. The first name Panthera is a genus and the second name species is the leo. So the scientific name of a lion is called Panthera leo. So let us have a brief history about where the name or who devised this naming system. So it was first devised by a Swedish scientist who is known by the name Linnaeus. There are so many scientists who devised the name, but the one which has been universally recognized and accepted is the one that belongs to Linnaeus, which is called the binomial nomenclature. So most of the names in this naming system are either given in Latin or in Greek because it is the convenient and widely accepted international language of science. For example, in our day-to-day life, there are some words that we use, but they have Latin words, but we don't know maybe. So these are the words that we use maybe in our daily lives. For example, if I talk of a word like vice versa, it is a Latin word that means the reverse order. If I talk of a word like post, it's normally used very oftenly. It means after, and it is a Latin word. Then pro is also a Latin word that means before. So most of these words, they have a root in Latin. So that's why in science mostly we use either Latin or Greek because it is accepted worldwide. So Linnaeus is the father of classification. We call him our father of taxonomy. So he was born in the 1707 and he died in 1778. So he's the godfather of taxonomy. He's the root cause why today we are learning about taxonomy and classification. So he used the physical features, that is morphology, of organisms to put them into particular groups. So when you talk about morphology, is the external features that we can easily see or we can easily identify a particular organism with. So he devised a hierarchical structure of classification, which is still used today, but just slightly modified. So he also devised this method that we are talking about today, which is known as the binomial system or the binomial nomenclature. So let us look at the general rules that we have to observe when we are naming an organism in science. So, for example, I have a scientific name of a human being which is called Homo sapiens. So going to use the example so that we can go through the rules of classification. So the first rule, the first name is the genus. In our example, Homo is the genus. Second rule, the name genus is written in capital letter, that is the first letter of the word. If you look at Homo, the first H is written with a capital letter. So you don't write the whole Homo with capital letter, it's just only the first word. So going to the third rule, the second name is a species. So our species name here is sapiens. The fourth rule, the species is written in small letter. So you can observe the species, the name sapiens is all written in small letter, written in italics if it is typed in our case. The name has been written in italics. Then the last rule of classification, the name must be underlined separately if it is handwritten. So in our case, it is not handwritten, that's why we are using the italics. But if it was to be handwritten, you're going to underline the two words separately. Homo, you underline it separately, and sapiens, you also underline it separately. So those are the rules we have to observe when we are naming an organism using the. So let us look at the significance of scientific name. Why is it important that we name our organism using the binomial nomenclature? So the first significance or the first importance is it gives us the correct name which is understood all around. If today you are to go in a certain country, maybe you don't know the language. For example, you've gone to China and you don't know how to speak that, and maybe you want to see something maybe in a Zoom. So you just go there and you tell them you want to see a lion. You tell them, I want to see a Panthera leo. Because you cannot speak Chinese, by you saying you want to see Panthera leo, it means that they also recognize it's a scientific word which is worldwide known. So you'll just be directed to the lion. So it can be, the name is understood all around the world. Then, the second importance of scientific naming, it avoids confusion when you are referring to an organism. For example, you can know an organism, or two of them, you can know them using the same word. But when you narrow down to scientific naming, there is no organism that can have this other. Maybe the genus name can be the same. For example, in the example of the Panthera families, we have the Panthera leo, we have the Panthera onca. The genus is the same, but when you narrow down to the species, they have to be different. Organism that can have two similar names or with two similar names. Then, the third importance of scientific naming, they are names that are universally recognized and be changed, so it will still remain the same. 4 years from now, 10 years from now, if it was called a Panthera onca, 10 years from now, it will still be called the Panthera onca. So let us look at some of the examples of organisms which have been named using the binomial nomenclature. For example, we have Canis familiaris. This is the domestic dog that you normally have at home. Then we have the Canis latrans, that is the coyotes. Then we have the Canis lupus, which is the grey wolf. If you observe this scientific name, you can observe that all the names have been written and the rules have been observed. For example, the genus name, the C, all of them, they start with a capital C. Then the species name, they use the small letters. So these are members of the same genus. Canis is the genus all round, from Canis familiaris up to down the lupus. All of them belong to the same genus. But when you narrow down, you go down to the species. Species is like the specific name of that organism. The species in all of these are different, but the Canis means that they all belong to the genus which we call the Canis. Another example of a scientific name, we have the lion. It is known as the Panthera leo. We have the jaguar. It is known as Panthera onca. They belong to the same genus we call Panthera. Then they have their own specific name, the species. Like for the lion, it is the leo. For the jaguar, it is the onca. Then we have the giant roundworms. Their scientific name is called Ascaris lumbricoides. Another example, we have our domestic chicken at home. It is known as the Gallus domesticus. You can see our digital chicken there. Still looking at further examples of scientific names. We have our tomato there. It's called Lycopodium esculentum. Then another example, we have the spinach. It's called Spinacio oleracea. You know, you are talking about scientific names when you cannot pronounce them exactly as they're supposed to be. So don't worry, just know how they are written. Another example of scientific name, we have the sweet potatoes. In science, it's known as Ipomea batatas. Then we have the maize. We have the maize, which is known as the Z maize. The beans, which has their scientific name is Phaseolus vulgaris. We have our onions, which you normally use at home. It's called Allium cepa. So those are just among the scientific names. There are so many of them. So you find time, try to look at some of the scientific names that we have. So that has been our lesson for today, and this is your assignment. Question number 1, what is meant by binomial nomenclature? Question number 2, scientific names of organisms, and observe the rules while writing the names. And the last question, Musca domestica is a scientific name for a housefly. Identify the rules that have not been observed while writing it and rectify the name. for today. Remember, you can write to us your feedbacks. You can write them on our Facebook page, which is Elimu TV. You can also write to us. Our Twitter handle is @elimu_ke, and our SMS number is 1H. Thank you for staying tuned. I have been your teacher, Madam Christine Okoth.